You have attacked my character and credibility.
And then it looked like it was going to be the body bump.
It was tense and confrontational from the beginning to the end.
The stakes are very, very high.
I don't think you ever win them, but you darn sure can lose them.
Funding for Debating Our Destiny is provided by Chevron.
Every day, it seems, talk of oil, energy, the environment. Where are the answers? Right now, Chevron is producing clean, renewable geothermal energy, generating enough to power 7 million homes. Imagine that. An oil company as part of the solution. This is the power of human energy, Chevron.
Hello, I'm Jim Lara. On Friday evening, September 26, John McCain and Barack Obama will meet on a stage in Oxford, Mississippi. And they'll do something that almost has become required of presidential candidates, something John Kennedy and Richard Nixon first did 48 years ago. They'll debate. In fact, the candidates have debated at least once every presidential election year since 1976. And they've done it standing, sitting, and walking around. But no matter the format, the debates have become the most anticipated moments of the presidential campaign.
The Richmond debate, Mr. President, you caught a lot of heat for looking at your watch. What was that all about?
Well, I wasn't too conscious of it
Would you-
at all. But it was
remember
he's bored.
that?
Yeah, oh God, do I remember? I took a huge hit.
The television cameras caught President Bush looking at his wristwatch midway through the debate, and again 30 minutes later.
Well, I remember I saw it at the time.
You did see it at the time?
Mm-hmm. I saw him look at his watch. And I thought, I felt when I saw it that he was, uncomfortable in that setting and wanted it to be over with.
You look at your watch and they say he shouldn't have any business running for president. He's bored and he's out of this thing and he's not with it and we need change. I mean, they took a little incident like that to show that I was, out of it. I mean, made a huge thing out of that.
If someone had caught me or Ross Perot looking at our watch, if it wasn't, unless it had been a bad moment in the debate, it probably wouldn't have resonated. But I think the reason the watch thing hurt so badly is it tended to reinforce the problem he had in the election.
Now, was I glad when the damn thing was over? Yeah. And maybe that's why I was looking at it.
Yeah.
Only 10 more minutes of this crap. I mean,
Of
all, use it.
Yeah,
I'm a free spirit
and
now.
that's in it. That's on the tape.
Run
Don't worry.
it, make that the
Don't
heading
worry.
as far as I'm concerned.
Of all of these
Maybe if
debates.
I'd have said that then, I'd have done better. But you're on guard.
Oh, sure.
You don't want to make a mistake. You don't want to. You want to say anything that's going to offend.
That was a segment from Debating Our Destiny, which was our first look at the history of presidential and vice presidential debates, which aired in 2000. Tonight, highlights from that program and from the 2000 and 2004 debates. In preparation, I interviewed nearly every candidate who has taken part in the debates, and I interviewed only the candidates.
There is no Soviet domination of Eastern Europe, and there never will be under a Ford administration.
Why did you say that?
There's no question I did not adequately explain what I was thinking. I felt very strongly that regardless of the number of Soviet armored divisions in Poland, the Russians would never dominate the Polish spirit. That's what I should have said. I simply left out the fact that at that time in 1976, the Russians had about 10 to 15 divisions in Poland.
This was a very serious mistake that he made. And I don't know if the election turned on it.
I was going to ask you that. Do you think it did?
I don't know if it did or not, because there's so many factors that come into a campaign, but it certainly cost him some votes, and as you know, the election was quite close.
One of them is your line, "There you go again." It came up in a discussion about Medicare and whether you had favored it or not early on.
Oh, yes.
Governor Reagan, as a matter of fact, began his political career campaigning around this nation against Medicare.
I wasn't against the Medicare bill that finally came along, but some of the people that were proposing this, it was obvious that they, in reality, wanted socialized medicine.
Governor Reagan, again, typically is against such a proposal.
Governor, there you go again. When I opposed Medicare, there was another piece of legislation meeting the same problem before the Congress. I happened to favor the other piece of legislation and thought that it would be better for the senior citizens and provide better care than the one that was finally passed.
Well, I'm sure that was a well-rehearsed line that President Reagan had prepared carefully, the style of delivery when he would bring it in, and it was an inevitable statement that he would make.
Was "There you go again" a line that just came to you spontaneously, or was it something that you had worked on?
No, it just seemed to be the thing to say and what he was saying up there. And because it was, to me, it felt kind of repetitious, something we'd heard before. Couldn't believe that question when it came at me from that press board that was there.
You already are the oldest president in history, and some of your staff say you were tired after your most recent encounter with Mr. Mondale. I recall yet that President Kennedy had to go for days on end with very little sleep during the Cuba Missile Crisis. Is there any doubt in your mind that you would be able to function in such circumstances?
Not at all, Mr. Truitt, and I want you to know that also I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience.
Was that one you were laying for? I mean,
I never thought about it coming out. That was really off the top of my head.
Yeah. Was that when you knew you were in trouble? When he said,
he got the audience with that. Yeah. That I could tell that one hurt.
Did that strike you as obviously a pre-programmed line?
Well, I'll tell you, if TV can tell the truth, as you say it can, you will see that I was smiling. But I think if you come in close, you'll see some tears coming down because I knew he'd gotten me there. Yeah. That was really the end of my campaign that night, I think.
Is that right?
That's what I thought.
And did you know that night when it was over?
Yeah, I walked off, and I was almost certain the campaign was over, and it was.
Did you say that to anybody?
My wife.
The first question goes to Governor Dukakis. You have 2 minutes to respond. Governor, if Kitty Dukakis were raped and murdered, would you favor an irrevocable death penalty for the killer?
No, I don't, Bernard, and I think you know that I've opposed the death penalty during all of my life. I don't see any evidence that it's a deterrent, and I think there are better and more effective ways to deal with violent crime.
You were criticized for your answer.
Right.
Explain what was going through your mind at that moment, what you were doing.
If you've been against the death penalty, as I have, and this has been an issue in virtually every campaign I've ever run in, you're asked that question or a variation of it about 1,000 times. And I had been. Unfortunately, I answered it as if I'd been asked it 1,000 times.
As an issue, you answered it as an issue question.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
Mike Dukakis seemed flustered by it, and instead of saying I'd, kill him if I could get my hands on him, there was some kind of politically correct answer, and I think that hurt him.
Sitting here now, do you wish you'd have done it differently?
Yeah, I guess so. On the other hand, I've listened and watched myself respond to that. And I have to tell you, and maybe I'm just still missing it or something, I didn't think it was that bad. But maybe it was. And again, I think you have to be aware of the fact when you're debating, and you have, say, a couple of debates, that a huge number of people are watching you. And although you've been answering these kinds of questions all during the campaign, or for that matter, all during your political career, for many people, it's the first time they've ever had a chance to look at you. And so I think you have to be sensitive to that. And obviously I wasn't.
Let us assume, if we can, for the sake of this question, that you become vice president and the president is incapacitated for one reason or another and you have to take the reins of power. When that moment came, what would be the first steps that you take and why?
First, I'd say a prayer for myself and for the country that I'm about to lead. And then I would assemble his people and talk.
What would you do next?
I don't believe that it's proper for me to get into the specifics of a hypothetical situation like that.
Senator Crowell, I don't mean to beat this drum until it has no more sound left in it, but to follow up on Brett Hume's question, surely you must have some plan in mind about what you would do if it fell to you to become president of the United States, as it has to so many vice presidents just in the last 25 years or so.
Let me try to answer the question one more time. I think this is the fourth time that I've had this question. And I think that 3 times that I've had this question, and I'll try to answer it again for you as clearly as I can. It is not just age, it's accomplishments, it's experience. I have far more experience than many others that sought the office of vice president of this country. I have as much experience in the Congress as Jack Kennedy did when he sought the presidency. I will be prepared to deal with the people in the Bush administration if that unfortunate event would ever occur.
Senator Benson.
Senator, I served with Jack Kennedy. I knew Jack Kennedy. Jack Kennedy was a friend of mine. Senator, you're no Jack Kennedy.
That was really uncalled for, Senator.
You're the one that was making the comparisons, Senator. And I'm one who knew him well. And frankly, I think you're so far apart in the objectives you choose for your country that I did not think the comparison was well taken.
Did you think that was a cheap shot? What was your thought when you were standing there and he said that?
We actually had anticipated him using a line like that because during the campaign, if you recall, a lot of people, reporters, probably you, Jim, as well, said, well, what kind of experience do you really have? And I would always make the factual reference to the experience that I had in the Congress and the Senate, to the experience that Jack Kennedy had before he was elected president. A factual statement, that was it, not any comparison, but as a factual statement. And the staff said, you know, sometime you might get in a little trouble with that. And I said, look, it's just a statement of fact. They said, okay, we know that. What I wasn't anticipating was the crowd getting involved as much. And they got very involved, as you can listen on the tape. That I did not expect, but I was somewhat prepared for his line. It was a good line.
Did you feel it hurt you in the long run?
Oh, in the long run, yes, because you guys keep running it over and over again. I'm sure you're going to run it again on this program, and it's not a good moment.
When the candidates met for the first of the 2 debates in Hartford on October 6, 1996, President Clinton spoke first and tried to set the tone for the evening.
I want to begin by saying again how much I respect Senator Dole and his record of public service, and how hard I will try to make this campaign and this debate one of ideas, not insults.
I was hoping to, take a little of the edge off. But I also wanted to show the American people that I liked and respected Bob Dole.
And the expectation was that he was really going to go after you on personal issues, on the character issue, and he didn't. Were you prepared for him to have done so?
Oh, yes.
Well, you get into that, I think everybody loses. That was my view.
Now, I was going to ask you about that, because you were asked. I asked you.
Senator Dole, we've talked mostly now about differences between the two of you that relate to policy issues and that sort of thing. Are there also significant differences in the more personal area that are relevant to this election?
Are there personal differences?
That are relevant to this election?
Well, my blood pressure is lower and my weight, my cholesterol, but I will not make health an issue in this campaign. So, I think he's a bit taller than I am, but I think there are personal differences. I mean, I don't like to get into personal matters. As far as I'm concerned, this is a campaign about issues. It's about my vision for America and about his liberal vision for America, and not about personal things.
Yeah, I was surprised the first debate. I thought he would hit me a little harder.
I concluded that once you cross that line, I mean, you know, then I think the campaign goes downhill.
When you went into those two debates, Hartford and then San Diego, you were behind in the polls. Did you feel that, hey, this is an opportunity to turn this thing around? Did you think they were that important?
You feel that way, but then you got to determine, well, how am I going to turn it around? That's the hard part. You know, if lightning strikes and you may hit a home run somewhere, but it doesn't happen in debates.
There were no questions that evening about scandals or investigations. The town hall format with citizens asking the questions made it a friendlier atmosphere.
My question is concerning you, Mr. Dole. All the controversy regarding your age, how do you feel you can respond to the young voices of America today and tomorrow?
One thing that I worried about personally was, you know, the age difference. Whether age might have been a factor because I was 73 at the time.
Well, I think age is very, you know, wisdom comes from age, experience, and intelligence. And if you have some of each, and I have some age, and some experience, some intelligence, that adds up to wisdom.
I can only tell you that I don't think Senator Dole is too old to be president. It's the age of his ideas that I question.
Was that a prepackaged line that you brought to the debate?
I think so.
Did you have a lot of those?
I don't remember for sure, but I think so. We did, and you don't use them all. If you can leave a memorable line or two in the public conscience, like when President Reagan said, "There you go again," that kind of thing.
In retrospect, do you think it would have mattered any in terms of the outcome if you'd gone after him hot and heavy on the character issue?
I don't think it would have made much of a difference. It would have reinforced this image that some people had that, you know, Bob Dole is mean and nasty, and now he's picking on President Clinton personally. And don't think I'm mean and nasty, and I didn't want to reinforce that view that some people may have had.
The 2000 presidential debates came at a time of relative calm. Americans mostly felt good about themselves and their place in the world. That was before there was 9/11, when the calm and much of the good feeling was blown away. Vice President Al Gore was the Democratic candidate for president in that October of 2000.
We need to make sure nobody is left behind, and I'll tell you this, I'm not satisfied. You ain't seen nothing yet. We need to make it stronger. This election is not an award for past performance. I'm not asking for your votes on the basis of the economy we have. I'm asking for your votes on the basis of the better, fairer, stronger economy that we'll create together.
Republicans chose a familiar name for their candidate, George Bush. Son of the 41st president, the twice-elected governor of Texas, who cast himself as a Washington outsider.
We have a new leader, a new attitude, a new way of conducting the nation's business by bringing people together. This nation does not want 4 more years of Clinton Gore. This nation wants a new change for a better tomorrow.
The candidates agreed to 3 October debates, which I was asked to moderate, the first at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. For the record, we invited Vice President Gore several times to share with us his debate experiences, but each time he declined. However, George W. Bush did talk with us at the White House.
Were there moments in any of these debates when you thought, oh my, the whole election, the whole 9 yards is on the line here, I could make a mistake, give a bad answer, do something dumb, or do something, inappropriate and blow the whole thing?
You know, I didn't go into the debates that way. I was pretty well prepared, I thought. No, you really go into the debate thinking about how to make sure that you speak as clearly as possible. And it's really a process of quick reaction and clear thinking and then trying to make sure that you're able to lay it out so the average guy can understand what you're saying.
One of the top issues of the 2000 campaign was what to do with the federal budget surplus, a problem the NewsHour's Paul Salmon reported on the day of the first debate.
But now, suddenly, the government is running a surplus, an estimated $230 billion this year alone. And as projected by the Congressional Budget Office, roughly $4.5 trillion over the next decade.
The candidates agreed with that surplus projection, but disagreed over what to do about it.
I will make sure that we invest in our country and our families. And I mean investing in education, health care, the environment, and middle-class tax cuts and retirement security.
Governor Bush, 1 minute rebuttal.
Well, we do come from different places. I come from West Texas. I've been a governor. A governor is the chief executive officer and learns how to set agendas. I want to take 1/2 of the surplus and dedicate it to Social Security, 1/4 of the surplus for important projects, and I want to send 1/4 of the surplus back to the people who pay the bills.
I agree that the surplus is the American people's money. It's your money. That's why I don't think we should give nearly half of it to the wealthiest 1%, because the other 99% have had an awful lot to do with building this surplus and our prosperity.
Governor, 1 minute.
Man's practicing fuzzy math again.
That term, fuzzy math, became one of George Bush's favorite lines of the debate.
Zingers, I think when Ronald Reagan in 1980 came up with some zingers, and that became, the measure of success to a certain extent.
I'm beginning to think not only did he invent the internet, but he invented the calculator. It's fuzzy math. I can't let the man continue with fuzzy math.
Unless there is the zinger, or the kind of the cute line, or the whatever, the quotable moment, there's no victor, in a sense.
In fact, Vice President Gore became increasingly animated in response.
There is a problem. I want to say something, Jim. Wait a minute. This man's been disparaging my plan with all this Washington fuzzy math. This is a man whose plan excludes 50 million Americans.
Not so.
And a few times Gore could be heard sighing off camera.
I just told you the criterion in which I'll appoint judges. I've had a record of appointing judges in the state of Texas. That's what a governor gets to do.
Remember, that was the sign and all that. Explain that.
I didn't have any idea what was going on. I really didn't. I was so focused. When it was over, somebody, I can't remember who it was, Karen or Karl Rover, somebody said, "You're not going to believe that Al Gore's facial expressions really cost him the debate," they thought.
During those 2000 debates, foreign policy seemed a distant second to domestic concerns. In fact, I did not ask my first foreign policy question until almost halfway through the first one.
Vice President Gore, President Milosevic of Yugoslavia refuses to accept the election results and leave office. What action, if any, should the United States take to get him out of there?
Well, Milosevic has been indicted as a war criminal, and he should be held accountable for his actions. Now, we have to take measured steps, because the sentiment within Serbia, even if they don't like Milosevic, they still have some feelings lingering from the NATO action there. So we have to be intelligent in the way we go about it.
Was this the kind of thing, to be specific, that you as president would consider the use of U.S. military force to get him gone?
In this particular situation, no.
And George Bush agreed.
New question. How would you go about, as president, deciding when it was in the national interest to use U.S. force, generally?
Well, if it's in our vital national interests, and that means whether or not our territory, our territory is threatened, or people could be harmed, whether or not our alliances, our defense alliances are threatened, whether or not our friends in the Middle East are threatened. Secondly, whether or not the mission was clear. And finally, whether or not there was an exit strategy. I would take the use of force very seriously.
No one raised any concerns about Iraqi President Saddam Hussein until a week later, during the second debate at Wake Forest University.
The coalition against Saddam has fallen apart, or it's unraveling, let's put it that way. The sanctions are being violated. We don't know whether he's developing weapons of mass destruction. He better not be, or there's going to be a consequence should I be the president.
Is there any difference?
I haven't heard a big difference in the last few exchanges.
Well, I think it's hard to tell. I think that, I would hope to be able to convince people I could handle the Iraqi situation better.
Over the course of the 2000 debates, Al Gore's debating style changed. Animated in the first, subdued in the second, more aggressive in the third.
Well, it was a little surreal.
It happened during the very first question of the third debate at Washington University in St. Louis.
How do you feel about HMOs and insurance companies making the critical decisions that affect people's lives instead of the medical professionals?
Mr. Hankins, I don't feel good about it, and I think we ought to have a patient's Bill of Rights.
For a few minutes, Bush and Gore sparred over the issue.
And so I was prowling a little bit, but so was Gore. Well, the difference is that I can get it done. That I can get something positive done on behalf of the people. That's what the question in this campaign is about. And he approached me at first, and I wasn't certain what was happening, and then it looked like it was going to be the body bump, the chest bump. It's not only what's your philosophy and what's your position on issues, but can you get things done? And I believe I can. I think, as I recall, I gave him kind of an odd expression, kind of a look, It was I couldn't tell if he was trying to threaten me, in which case it amused me even more, or whether I wasn't sure what his motives were. All I can tell you is that I think if you review the tape, you'll see kind of a bemused expression on my face.
And you just walked away.
I did.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting. Well, the other option was, go through a huge chest bump, which in itself would have maybe decided the debate. And he was bigger than I am, in which case
The one debate between the vice presidential candidates could not have looked, sounded, or felt more different. For his running mate, George Bush had selected a longtime Washington insider, Dick Cheney. He had been Gerald Ford's White House Chief of Staff, served 5 terms in Congress, and rose to a House leadership position. The first George Bush tapped him to be his Secretary of Defense. The second asked Cheney to head his vice presidential search committee, eventually deciding he wanted Cheney himself.
I believe you're looking at the next Vice President of the United States.
Al Gore picked for his running mate 2-term Senator Joe Lieberman. The candidates met on the campus of Centre College in Danville, Kentucky, just 2 days after that first Bush-Gore meeting. And the tone of that debate affected this one immensely.
About, a week or 10 days before the debate, my presidential candidate, Al Gore, called me up, and he said, are you getting ready for the debate? I said, yes, I am. He said, you know what Cheney's going to do during the whole debate, don't you? I said, what? He said, he's going to attack me, so your job is to defend me. He had been through this in '92 in his debate with Quayle, Dan Quayle, because Quayle spent the whole night attacking Clinton.
We'd gone back in preparation for that debate and looked at Joe's debates with Lowell Weicker when he ran for the Senate in Connecticut some years before. And Joe was very tough. I mean, in those debates with Weicker, it was a knockdown, drag-out kind of an affair. And so I went in prepared for that possibility.
A couple of days, 2, 3, 4 days before the debate, when we were at the debate training camp, the campaign pollsters came in, particularly after the first Gore-Bush debate, which was very acrimonious. And they said, the public doesn't want a nasty, harsh attack, a counterattack debate. So just sort of get the facts out there, make the case for the ticket. So I said, okay, I won't be. I've been in debates. I know how to be aggressive in a debate. So I said, well, surely I'm going to point out some of those votes that Cheney cast against the Head Start program, against the Free Nelson Mandela resolution. No, the pollsters said the public is sick of that stuff. My 85-year-old mom gave me some good advice about the debate earlier today. She said, remember, be positive and know that I will love you no matter what your opponent says about you. Well, I am going to be positive tonight. I'm not going to indulge in negative personal attacks. Now, what is interesting is that after the campaign was over, somebody interviewed Matthew Dowd, who was the Republican pollster, and he told Cheney the exact same thing that Stan Greenberg had told me. The public is sick and tired of the acrimony. Just go in there and make the case. And Cheney apparently said to him, "You mean I can't even criticize Gore's voting record?" And apparently Dowd said, "No."
And I am delighted to be here tonight with you, Joe. And I, too, want to avoid any personal attacks. I promise not to bring up your singing.
But Cheney pointed to another factor that might have set the tone for the evening.
I'm a great believer that the physical arrangements are important. And the one condition that we had both in 2000 and 2004 in terms of the negotiations prior to the debate was I wanted to be seated at a table. I wanted the format like this, or as we do on Meet the Press or on your show on PBS, the bit with the podiums and the stages and certain spacing between the podiums and those kinds of arrangements I felt always gave it sort of a stilted affair, and I'm just much more comfortable sitting down, talking. And say both times we were successful. We had that as sort of our non-negotiable demand for the vice presidential debate, and both times they agreed.
Were you aware of that?
It's interesting. You know, nobody's told me that before.
Is that right?
Really? And here's, I come back to this because, you know, there was a team negotiating, and they said, we're going to do this seated. And I must admit, my first response was, gee, that's strange. I've done all my other debates, Senate debates, standing. And they said, no, we think this will be great for you because, you know, you're comfortable and it'll make you feel just like you're on a TV interview. Perhaps on the Jim Lehrer NewsHour, something weird like that. And so that was about it.
It's been suggested that one of the reasons yours and Cheney's debate was so civilized was because you were seated.
Yeah.
And did that kind of influence the situation? Do you have any opinion about that?
That's very interesting. And I have never thought much about it, but I do think that both Dick Cheney and I were comfortable sitting down. But it's true that when you're standing, there's a tendency to be more on the attack. So maybe it did help.
With CNN's Bernie Shaw moderating, what transpired was the most civilized debate anyone could remember.
It was civilized, almost quaintly so by contemporary political standards. We disagreed on a lot of the subjects we discussed, and sometimes in pretty direct terms.
On education.
I disagree with what my opponent has said. A lot of progress has been made in recent years.
On military readiness.
In fact, the U.S. military is worse off today than it was 8 years ago.
Senator, you're shaking your head in disagreement.
Well, I am, Bernie.
On energy.
Bernie, this is an area where, again, I think Joe and I have fairly significant disagreements.
Bernie, we agree on the problem, but we couldn't disagree more on the response to the problem.
On Social Security reform.
You won't be surprised, Bernie, if I disagree with Joe's description of our program.
But it was a very civil debate, and I think the public gained from it, and I'm very proud of that debate and always will be.
Cheney, however, got the better of Lieberman during the most memorable exchange of the evening.
At one point, he made some reference to the fact that I'd done well in the private sector, and while I was running Halliburton.
I think if you asked most people in America today that famous question that Ronald Reagan asked, are you better off today than you were 8 years ago, most people would say yes. And I'm pleased to see, Dick, from the newspapers that you're better off than you were 8 years ago, too.
And most of it, and I can tell you, Joe, that the government had absolutely nothing to do with it.
I can see my wife, and I think she's thinking, gee, I wish she would go out into the private sector.
Well, I'm going to try to help you do that, Joe. It was a part of an exchange that in some ways made some points about the substance, but also was, I think, set a nice tone for the debate, and I felt we scored a few points off that.
Maybe Dick Cheney benefited from the quipping because people did not think of Cheney as a quipster. So it probably helped him to show that side of his personality.
Did you believe after the Lieberman debate that you won that debate?
I did.
I'll tell you something. I think both Dick Cheney and I did well in that debate, and I suppose I'd say that both of us gained, and therefore maybe both of us were winners.
17 months after mission accomplished was declared, the war in Iraq still dominated the news, and the 2004 presidential campaign as well. There had been a series of spikes in U.S. troop deaths, 76 in September alone. Total troop casualties surpassed 1,000. Iraq, according to President Bush, had become the central front in the war on terror.
We must whip the terrorists in Iraq so we don't have to face them here at home. That's exactly what we're seeing.
And opinion polls showed a slight plurality of Americans still supported the president, despite no weapons of mass destruction found in Iraq and no connection to the September 11th attacks.
The president's misjudgment, miscalculation, and mismanagement of the war in Iraq all make the war on terror harder to win.
Massachusetts Senator John Kerry had survived a bruising nominating campaign and was challenging the president primarily on the war issue. A decorated Vietnam veteran, Kerry turned against that war and 30 years later turned against the Iraq War, but only after voting to authorize it. Kerry saw a debate with the president on national television as the chance to explain himself.
I certainly went in with points that I wanted to make. I mean, I knew with respect to Iraq that it was really important to make people understand my position, which people had worked hard to confuse at that point, and it's a difficult issue. How did you vote for a resolution, but you're a critic of what is happening? It wasn't complicated to me because I laid out everything that I was supporting in the vote and everything I wasn't in the speech on the floor of the Senate. But obviously Americans don't hear that. And so you have to translate that.
Although John Kerry wanted more debates, the candidates settled on 3.
Good evening from the University of Miami Convocation Center in Coral Gables, Florida.
I moderated the first debate. It was all about foreign policy, primarily Iraq and terrorism. Each candidate vigorously defended his position and attacked the others.
This president I don't know if he sees what's really happening on there, but it's getting worse by the day. More soldiers killed in June than before, more in July than June, more in August than July, more in September than in August.
First of all, what my opponent wants you to forget is that he voted to authorize the use of force and now says it's the wrong war at the wrong time at the wrong place. I don't see how you can lead this country to succeed in Iraq if you say wrong war, wrong time, wrong place. What message does that send our troops? What message does that send our allies?
Does the Iraq experience make it more likely or less likely that you would take the United States into another preemptive military action?
I would hope I'd never have to. Understand how hard it is to commit troops. I never wanted to commit troops. When we had the debate in 2000, never dreamt I'd be doing that. But the enemy attacked us, Jim, and I have a solemn duty to protect the American people, to do everything I can to protect us.
Jim, the president just said something extraordinarily revealing and frankly, very important in this debate. In answer to your question about Iraq and sending people into Iraq, he just said, the enemy attacked us. Saddam Hussein didn't attack us. Osama bin Laden attacked us. Al-Qaeda attacked us. That's the enemy that attacked us. That's the enemy that was allowed to walk out of those mountains. That's the enemy that is now in 60 countries with stronger recruits.
First, listen, of course I know Osama bin Laden attacked us. I know that. And secondly, to think that another round of resolutions would have caused Saddam Hussein to disarm, disclose, is ludicrous in my judgment. It just shows a significant difference of opinion.
Do you believe the election of Senator Kerry on November the 2nd would increase the chances of the U.S. being hit by another 9/11 type terrorist attack?
I don't believe it's going to happen. I believe I'm going to win because the American people know I know how to lead. I've shown the American people I know how to lead. In Iraq, no doubt about it, it's tough. It's hard work. It's incredibly hard. You know why? Because an enemy realizes the stakes. The enemy understands a free Iraq will be a major defeat in their ideology of hatred. That's why they're fighting so vociferously.
I believe in being strong and resolute and determined. And I will hunt down and kill the terrorists wherever they are. But we also have to be smart, Jim. And smart means not diverting your attention from the real war on terror in Afghanistan against Osama bin Laden and taking it off to Iraq, where the 9/11 Commission confirms there was no connection to 9/11 itself in Saddam Hussein, and where the reason for going to war was weapons of mass destruction, not the removal of Saddam Hussein. This president has made, I regret to say, a colossal error of judgment.
The conventional wisdom of the pundits and everyone when it was over, that you won that debate, that you went into that behind in the polls and you drew fairly close when it was all said and done. Was that your impression at the time?
Yes, because I think I had an opportunity to break down the stereotypes. And I also had an opportunity to show the upside of what I was thinking and the downside of what he was thinking.
At the same time, George Bush was criticized for being overly expressive during that debate, much like Al Gore was in 2000.
I guess I didn't learn any lessons from the first debate in 2000. I thought I did pretty well in the first debate, and it was, you're not going to believe your facial expressions caused people to say you didn't do very well.
Mr. President, for the record, I had exactly the same experience. When the first question was asked, I looked at you, and you had a facial expression, and I decided then I would never look at anybody except the person who was talking.
Yeah.
And so when it was over, I also did not know about the facial expressions.
I think I was just being myself. You know, I was just like, probably saying, I can't believe this guy's saying that. Or I wasn't trying to be rude. It was just, it came, believe it or not, it was natural.
Were you aware of anything like that at the time?
I certainly was aware of his answers and of some of the body language, but you can never tell what's translating into that now plasma screen or box or whatever. But I've learned enough through the years to know that you can think you're doing just great in the hall, and it doesn't work, doesn't translate.
I'm not that good a stage person, and so I was, frankly, I thought somebody said, don't worry, there's going to be the cameras on the speaker. But that still, in other words, I wasn't trying to needle Senator Kerry. I wasn't trying to, use my facial expressions to cause him to say something different. It was just a natural reaction to what he was saying. Look, the interesting thing about presidential debates is I don't think you ever win them, but you darn sure can lose them.
The second debate was in St. Louis, a town hall format that George Bush had grown to like.
Moving around it relaxes the debater, it seems like to me.
But the rules of engagement frustrated John Kerry.
I had 90 seconds to talk to America about why I thought what I thought.
Mr. President, how would you rate yourself as an environmentalist?
My God, we're talking about global climate change, cancer, health, security, energy independence, pollution of our waterways, loss of our fisheries, countless issues. And we had 90 seconds to talk about them in the most viewed moment of a presidential race.
And that was the result of the wishes of President Bush and his...
Their team was very adamant that there would be no questions, there would be very short answers, very short period of time.
No questions between them.
No questions between us.
However, that second debate did have its lighter moments.
The president got $84 from a timber company that he owns, and he's counted as a small business. Dick Cheney's counted as a small business. That's how they do things.
That's just not right.
I own a timber company? That's news to me. You need some wood?
So the third debate, domestic policy, gay marriage came up.
I want to ask you a more basic question. Do you believe homosexuality is a choice?
We're all God's children, Bob, and I think if you were to talk to Dick Cheney's daughter, who is a lesbian, she would tell you that she's being who she was. She's being who she was born as. I think if you talk to anybody, it's not choice.
You raised the issue of Mary Cheney being a lesbian, and there was some criticism of that. Do you have any second thoughts about that?
No, none whatsoever. I thought the criticism was contrived and inappropriate. I was trying to show that people can be completely embracing and affectionate of it and totally accepting of it. And obviously, it's also important because there's such a contradiction in the public position of that administration. So they can do it privately, but they can't do it publicly, and they play to different politics. And I thought it was important for people to understand that.
We live in a country where there are really still two different Americas. One for all those families who have whatever they need whenever they want it, and then one for everybody else.
John Edwards would have preferred he be the candidate debating George Bush in 2004, but Edwards finished second to John Kerry in most of the early Democratic primary contests and dropped from the presidential race in March. 4 months later, Kerry tapped the North Carolina senator to be his running mate, hoping Edwards' appeal with blue-collar workers would strengthen the ticket. And so in 2004, Edwards did debate, but it was Dick Cheney on an October night at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland. Did you have a strategy, a way you wanted to go in that from the very beginning?
Yeah, I felt like because I'd watched the Cheney-Lieberman debate from 2000, I felt like that had gone too easy for Cheney, and I thought he needed to be challenged from the beginning so that there was a real interaction.
What transpired was an experience far different from what Cheney had enjoyed 4 years earlier with Joe Lieberman.
I didn't have those same feelings with respect to Senator Edwards. That was more confrontational.
It was tense and confrontational from the beginning to the end. It was exhausting, actually, because of that.
With the NewsHour's Gwen Ifill acting as moderator and referee, the two candidates quarreled extensively over the Iraq War.
What we did in Iraq was exactly the right thing to do. If I had it to recommend all over again, I would recommend exactly the right same course of action. The world's far safer today because Saddam Hussein is in jail, his government's no longer in power, and we did exactly the right thing.
Senator Edwards, you have 90 seconds to respond.
Mr. Vice President, you are still not being straight with the American people. I mean, the reality, you and George Bush continue to tell people, first, that things are going well in Iraq. The American people don't need us to explain this to them. They see it on their television every single day. And these connections, and I want the American people to hear this very clearly, listen carefully to what the Vice President is saying, because there is no connection between Saddam Hussein and the attacks of September 11th. Period.
The senator's got his facts wrong. I have not suggested there's a connection between Iraq and 9/11, but there's clearly an established Iraqi track record with terror. The fact of the matter is that the big difference here, Gwen, is that they are not prepared to deal with states that sponsor terror. They've got a very limited view about how to use U.S. military force to defend America. It's a consistent pattern over time of always being on the wrong side of defense issues.
We also thought it was wrong to have a $20 billion fund, out of which $7.5 billion was going to go to a no-bid contract for Halliburton, the Vice President's former company. It was wrong then, it's wrong now.
You raised Halliburton very early and confrontationally. Why?
Yes. Because I thought it undermined the Vice President's credibility. He was continuing to try to claim that he was, concerned about ordinary people, concerned about the war, and I thought that the whole issue of Halliburton and his history with Halliburton undermined his credibility. They did business with Libya and Iran, two sworn enemies of the United States. They're now under investigation for having bribed foreign officials during that period of time.
Mr. Vice President?
I could respond, Gwen, but it's going to take more than 30 seconds.
Well, that's all you've got.
Well, the reason they keep mentioning Halliburton is because they want to obscure their own record. And Senator, frankly, you have a record in the Senate that's not very distinguished. Your hometown newspaper has taken to calling you Senator Gone. You've got one of the worst attendance records in the United States Senate. Now, in my capacity as Vice President, I am the President of the Senate, the presiding officer. I'm up in the Senate most Tuesdays when they're in session. The first time I ever met you was when you walked on the stage tonight.
Did that upset you? That bother you?
It was utter nonsense. I mean, it was utter nonsense because the president himself had campaigned more than I had. Anybody who's running for president of the United States, you could have criticized for exactly the same reason. When he was arguing that he and I hadn't met each other before as part of the Senator Gone argument, I knew that was false, and it would be obvious in a day or so that was false.
The one moment I remember that I wasn't happy about, I guess, if I could put it in those terms, was when he made reference to my daughter.
The reference came during a question about same-sex unions, a question the presidential candidates later would face.
Next question goes to you, Mr. Vice President. I want to read something you said 4 years ago at this very setting. Freedom means freedom for everybody. You said it again recently when you were asked about legalizing same-sex unions, and you used your family as an experience, your family experience as a context for your remarks. Can you describe then your administration's support for a constitutional ban on same-sex unions?
Gwen, you're right. 4 years ago in this debate, the subject came up, and I said then and believe today that freedom does mean freedom for everybody. People ought to be free to choose any arrangement they want. It's really no one else's business. That's a separate question from the issue of whether or not government should sanction or approve or give some sort of authorization, if you will, to these relationships. Traditionally, that's been an issue for the states. States have regulated marriage, if you will. That would be my preference.
Senator Edwards, 90 seconds.
Let me say first that I think the Vice President and his wife love their daughter. I think they love her very much. And you can't have anything but respect for the fact that they're willing to talk about the fact that they have a gay daughter, the fact that they embrace her. It's a wonderful thing.
It was the way it came up, the fact that it related to a family member. Talk about one of my children. Mm-hmm. That was the wrinkle that I thought was not in the best taste, if I can put it in those terms. I thought it was a bit of a cheap shot.
And you said you were angry.
I was.
And what did you do about your anger? How did you handle
Controlled it.
You controlled it.
He made some statement, sort of a condescending statement. I'm sure the Cheneys love their daughter very much, kind of thing.
Condescending and a bit of a cheap shot. How do you feel about that?
I think he's just dead wrong. And I honestly thought this was something to be admired. I thought that the American people would respond really positively to what the Vice President had done. I thought it was an example of a difference between the Vice President and the President. That was the point I was making, because I agreed with what he had been doing within his family, and I didn't agree with what President Bush was doing.
Cheney sat without expression, waiting for his turn to speak.
Mr. Vice President, you have 90 seconds.
Well, Gwen, let me simply thank the Senator for the kind words he said about my family and our daughter. I appreciate that very much.
You're welcome.
That's it.
That's it. I was angry, but tried not to let it show. And it, I think, had an impact in the sense that it fed in then a few days later to the debate between Kerry and President Bush, when Kerry brought up again the question of my daughter's sexual orientation in a way that I think ultimately hurt them, hurt their cause.
Whether a single debate has ever decided an election is a debate in itself. However, it is the only opportunity to evaluate the candidates side by side, to gauge their responses, to watch how they interact. For the candidates, it's one of their last chances to close the deal with voters, and it's all about to play out again in just a few weeks. I'm Jim Lara. Thank you.